So the panel now is unlocking liquidity through interoperability.
All right. Okay, so do you guys want to quickly introduce yourselves? We'll start with...
Sure. Hey guys, I'm Nick, CTO of Teller. We're an Oracle.
Hi there. My name is Jazzy. I lead the institutional DeFi products group at Ripple. We're within RippleX, and we focus on all things XRP Ledger and developing, contributing to that layer 1 blockchain.
Hey guys, I'm Siddharth, CEO of Range Protocol. At Range Protocol, we are building the trustless infrastructure for running sophisticated strategies on top of different asset segments and sort of bootstrapping liquidity and improving the market in general.
Cool. Hey everyone, my name is Seamus Noonan. I'm on the business development team at Circle. Circle's the issuer of USDC and EURC. I lead all of the blockchain partnerships there. Super excited and honored to be a part of this panel.
Awesome. My name is Alex with AutoSec. We do smart contract audits. If you need an audit, let me know. All right, so today we're talking about unlocking liquidity through interoperability. Maybe start with like quick definitions, like what does interoperability mean to everybody?
All right. Yeah. I mean, I guess I can go. So like I think we had talked about this too. Like what does interoperability mean? Is it between sort of TradFi and DeFi? And that's a different sort of meaning when it comes to interoperability, because there's kind of this whole regulatory piece that we have to talk about and kind of where the assets live and what it actually means. Whenever you're talking about interoperability, most of the time, at least in the context I'm used to talking about it, it's kind of how do different blockchains talk to each other. So, how does, Ethereum know what's happened on Solana? And, kind of the framework that I'm coming at it is, basically, how can chains know about another chain's consensus? And it's a really, really hard, unsolved problem.
I can go next. So from our perspective, mostly the key focus goes around secondary market of a lot of these tokens. In general, like everyone is like, the 10 events I go to here are mostly like 9 would be about modularity and all these rollups and all. So if you're going to have so many different ecosystems, I totally agree, like interoperability is a very difficult problem. But from our perspective, the key thing that we're trying to solve is that from the perspective of liquidity. Now, if you're going to have a particular pair trading on 100 different venues, then just for syncing the state on those venues, be it through these like arbitrage bots or be it through like some kind of Oracle, there'll be a lot of like MEV toxic flow that would be coming from that perspective. So what we're trying to do is sort of build infrastructure through these different solvers and sort of improve on the liquidity, so that if say one project needs a token to exist on like hundreds of chains, so you need to have some kind of connected rebalancing strategies across them. So from our perspective, we work with a network of private market makers, trading desk and all to sort of optimize on that side. One more definition that we see for the interoperability was the interactions between DeFi and TradFi. So we're working with a lot of these like real world asset issuers, one of them being Ondo. So from their perspective, again, like for interacting on the primary market, like they build this yield bearing token called USDY, but only whitelisted KYC entities are able to sort of interact in the primary market for that. And in most of the jurisdictions, you can't sort of access that because of the regulatory reasons. And aside from that, there were other nitty-gritties also, like for minting or burning on primary market, there's a 40-50 day delay. So imagine that like you have a lot of farming stuff, a lot of DeFi interactions happening with that token, but then if say it's trading at a premium to its reference price or at a discount to a reference price, then you need to do some kind of interaction on a primary market. So there needs to be some kind of infrastructure on that perspective where the way you are managing liquidity, it should be connected with players who can interact on the primary market so that the secondary market stays liquid enough. So we do a lot of stuff on that perspective also from our side.
Any other comments? All right. We'll move on to the next set of questions. Then, can you talk to us a bit about how interoperability contributes to unlocking liquidity within the DA ecosystem?
Sure. Yeah, I can take that one. So if we think back to the introduction of blockchain and the problem that it was really intending to solve, we can take a look at traditional finance, and you have these clear silos across different financial institutions. And when open networks and Bitcoin, for example, were introduced, they were really intended to break down those walls, disintermediate and decentralize the financial system and allow for value to flow smoothly throughout the network. And so while that problem was initially solved with the introduction of chains like Bitcoin and the XRP ledger, as time went on and the number of blockchains continued to grow, and you now have L1s, L2s, Ethereum came on the scene, and it just continues to proliferate. It's almost as if we came almost full circle, in that now we have new walls and new silos where liquidity gets trapped on each of these individual blockchains. So interoperability and infrastructure like that of Axelar and Layer 0 is a great solution to that problem, and it's finally going to allow for the transfer of value, so tokens moving between these individual chains that all have their unique advantages and reason for attracting users, as well as information through new technologies and advancements like general message passing. So I think there are kind of two clear benefits in terms of how this interoperability will unlock additional liquidity, and the first is market efficiency. So now that value can seamlessly flow between chains, you no longer are going to have the issue where a particular user wants, say, USDC, for example, but that token is not issued on a particular chain. USDC can be brought over by a bridge, for example, and now there's greater access to a particular token. The other one that's even bigger is market depth and liquidity. So by removing liquidity silos, you're now going to have less slippage for traders because there's greater market depth. The second piece that I'll mention in terms of how interoperability helps unlock liquidity is really expansion. So the first reason was access to the pie. The second reason is expanding the pie. So interoperability infrastructure allows for greater innovation, new use cases, and a much, much better user experience, which is what's necessary for DeFi and on-chain finance to really reach the masses. So that allows for new capital injection into the full system and greater liquidity across the board. So interoperability is definitely essential in terms of unlocking liquidity in crypto.
Go ahead. I was going to say, Jazzy, well put. We're big believers at Circle that it is going to be a multi-chain future. And USDC was issued on Ethereum in 2018, found great product market fit with some initial protocols like Aave and Compound and other real asset providers. And then in the last few years, we've seen this Cambrian explosion of layer 1, layer 2s. And I actually help manage issuing USDC natively on new blockchains at Circle. We have a list of 60 to 70 blockchains who are looking for native USDC. And one of the biggest problems they have is liquidity. And if I'm a user going into this new L1, L2, one of the first questions is, how do I bring in liquidity from either Ethereum or an existing blockchain I'm on? And then the user is posed with a couple different options and questions, whether it's a bridge or from a centralized exchange. And something we rolled out last year was our cross-chain transfer protocol, which is a permissionless open utility for the flow of USDC from one native blockchain to another. And it's through a mint and burn functionality. So we like to say you're teleporting USDC, you're not actually bridging it. And this unlocks so much liquidity in the sense of no longer do I have to choose, I'm on Polygon and I have to stay on Polygon, or I have to bring it back to this chain. And the nice thing about CCTP, for example, is it's a many-to-many protocol in solving that liquidity issue with real-world asset protocols. And what I mean by that is, like, we see Ethereum, and everyone sees Ethereum, like 87% of USDC circulating supply is on Ethereum. Everyone thinks, we must go to Ethereum to get supply out of there if I don't want to on-ramp with fiat or dollars. But with CCTP, for example, you can actually bring this from, say, Optimism onto Arbitrum without having to go to Ethereum first. So as a user, this unlocks a lot because there's not an extra step, there's not an extra protocol fee, and that user can know, hey, I am bringing this from one chain to another. It's not bridged away anywhere else, and it's going to be minted on that destination chain. So we're big, and we're starting to see this with some of these real-world asset providers, where no longer is it just, hey, we support Ethereum, it's, hey, we support 6 of these different chains. And it's going to be fun watching and seeing trends emerge for this chain is popular in this region, or this chain's popular for this specific, DEX swap based on fees and other, factors. That user can choose and bring that back and forth. So that's something we're really excited about as well.
Yeah, I think from our perspective, we sort of, I'll focus more on the capital efficiency side of things. So in general, like how we see things is that like USDC definitely is like the key code coin for most of the activity that happens. But for fatter tail assets, if you sort of want to have any kind of activity on all of these new chains, then there are basically three ways we have seen things evolve. So the first level is like, say, if a new chain has launched, so they would first fork like themes that work. So they would want an AMM on their chain, they would want a liquidity market on their chain and all. But so far, all of this is completely fragmented. Like these are not interconnected in any way. So if I look at like metrics, like say for ETH stablecoin, ETH USDC pair, for example, if I need to swap like say a $200K worth of size on that, then for having less than 1% slippage, I'll just give like an average number, but you need at least like a 5 million Uniswap V3 kind of pool. But if we are going to have like thousands and millions of chains, not everyone will have a capital to then like have a whole DeFi ecosystem first of 100 million, and then there would be liquidity for other stuff to happen and the network effects to play out on that chain. So from that perspective, like capital-wise, you need like some kind of connected state and interoperability in terms of like this DeFi interaction. So from our perspective, we're just super focused on sort of trying to solve that part of the puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of tough because like, interoperability should, when you're talking like, there's interoperability, okay, how do we get, liquidity on each chain, meaning just bridging a token? And the problem with bridging tokens is obviously like, bridges are pretty bad still. It's a centralized counterparty, in a lot of cases. And, same with even when you're talking about accessing liquidity on multiple different chains, because there's the issue of like, I want to make a big trade with slippage. And this is probably a question for the range guy. We can just have a good conversation on it. Because like you can, is it actually accessing off-chain liquidity if like, I just got filled off-chain by Wintermute? Like is that something that is, yes, it's interoperable, but is it actually?
Yeah, so like for the user, it doesn't matter. Like user wouldn't know the nitty-gritties of what's happening in the backend. They would just have one front end. Like they will just go to 1inch and try to swap. So that's why, like I will have a whole keynote on this, like how we sort of approach this. But on a high level, I said like the first level is you sort of just keep on forking the themes that work, like a Uniswap V3 you fork there. The second level that you go is basically you have a lot of sophisticated stuff. So from our side, we do a lot of connected liquidity management strategies. We work with a lot of private market makers who basically act as a way for you to like aggregate liquidity across multiple chains, multiple centralized exchanges and all that. But the third level would be like that has not been achieved, right? It's basically all of these states are connected. But with like each of these states having different consensus mechanism, different finalities and all that. That's the trickiest part of the puzzle. If you look at like Rect and all, like most of the hacks happen around like these bridges and all that. So I think the way, there's always a trade-off between centralization and execution. So for a user, he just wants the assets in. So if the cross-chain interoperability risk is sort of bore by like a private market maker or a solver, that like for a user, it's still a better UX. Like that's how we see it.
Yeah, but I think like, like obviously that works if like the user is just a trader, but like the true interoperability dream is like, how can like Aave access multi-chain liquidity? Like if you're a lending protocol and you just you have this whole thing that you need to liquidate really fast, the only thing you can really rely on is what's on that chain right now. Like you can't rely on anything else, and then you get a ton of toxic flow because you can't liquidate it. And that's still kind of the unsolved problem, and I don't think it necessarily is solved, but maybe you can.
I think like from how I see things, within the next year or so also, the nearest solution we would get would be through these solvers or private market makers and all. For achieving actual interoperability, I think it will take a lot longer and all that. But for that, you cannot have all these different chains implementation done independently. There has to be some kind of connected module for sort of like that's built in all of these chains for this thing to work. So like a lot of people talk about like decentralized sequencers and all that. So if OP stack or optimistic rollup based chains get super big, then yeah, you need to have shared messaging, because if you have to wait for like 7 days for transferring something from Arbitrum to Optimism, that's not going to work.
you guys talk a little bit more about these challenges you kind of see, like what you just mentioned?
I mean, if you guys want to jump in too, feel free. But I think like, the biggest problem is okay. So how can you come? Kind of like he was talking about it. It has to do with chain finality, and did something actually happen on the other chain? And this is like Cosmos chains are sort of built for this, because as soon as 2/3 of the validators sign off on something, the chain is finalized. You can then pass those 2/3 of signatures over via IBC, and everything works and it's interoperable, assuming there's no fork. You can't do that on Ethereum. You can't do that on a lot of these other chains. We're working on it, so like there's a lot of zero knowledge clients that are being built that okay, we can actually prove in a zero knowledge proof. But then the question is okay, well, how fast can you possibly do that? And are you actually like even if you can prove it, can you prove that something can get executed there? Like I want to do some liquidation and I need to actually make sure that it's going to happen on this other chain. And yeah, I guess the shared sequencer layer is something that people are talking about as a potential solution. But then you get into the problem of, okay, well, are we just re-centralizing everything underneath the shared sequencer, which is like defeats the purpose of the decentralized chains that we're building on. So yeah, back to square one.
I mean, if we zoom out a little bit and just think about product market fit, I think right now the user base of crypto and these on-chain traders are still highly technical, crypto native type users. And if we think about over time as more and more people and users adopt on-chain finance, perhaps the use case shifts and maybe it isn't intended for incredibly high frequency trading and high speed financial transactions, and it becomes, as we heard in some of the prior sessions, more of a settlement layer, in which case, if it takes 10 blocks to reach settlement, that's still significantly, it's still a significant improvement than the T+2, T+3 that we're seeing in TradFi. So maybe it's somewhat of a product market fit question, and over time we'll start to figure out what the best use case is there.
Speaking of use cases, can you guys talk to him about like use cases that would be good for these multi-chain assets?
I'm happy to kick it off. On the real world asset front, we're seeing a lot of use cases for like a couple examples like Centrifuge, Maple, a couple others where they're supporting multiple chains, and we recently announced support for Celo we're really excited about, because one of the nice, interesting use cases for this is there's a governance proposal up right now for USDC to be used as gas, and you have predictable or near predictable fees. So in terms of like use cases and things unlocking, right, like Jazzy's point, zooming out, you're bringing in a whole new variety of people from emerging markets that can say, okay, I want to borrow dollars or digital dollars, and if I want to lend dollars to this protocol, I'm paying in dollars. We're abstracting away a lot of the things, and there should be more downstream applications that can implement things like swaps or functions where users don't even have to know. Just like when I'm on Venmo, I don't know if I'm sending money to Jazzy if she's Bank of America or Chase, but it just lands in her account. She sends money to me, the same thing. That's the future and hope, and I think that will open up a lot more use cases, especially internationally, where it's not sophisticated Web3 traders looking for arbitrage strategies. It's, hey, I own a farm and I'm looking for a loan and I don't have a bank within 3,000 miles of me. How can I get access to this? So that's some stuff on the USDC and stablecoin side we're seeing. Seeing a lot of remittances, a lot of what we're calling dollarization, so folks in emerging countries where the local fiat currencies hyperinflated, they need some sort of store of value where they know what that value will be in 30, 60, 90 days. So this wraps into a lot of different, I would say, subcategories of tokenization in real world assets, but we're really excited about all of those.
Cool. I think, from our perspective, the definition or like the problem that we're trying to solve is a different. Like from Circle side, it's more about like Web 2 and Web 3 interactions. From our side, it's more about between Web 3, like intra Web 3 across chains and all that. So, I think in terms of the use case, I'll first sort of go over like what part of this whole modular multi-chain world I'm bullish about. I think for a lot of these new chains emerging, like the concept, like everyone pitches it also, was that like you have certain use case for each of these chains. Otherwise, they were like being fulfilled by a general purpose chain also. But you want certain kind of particular customizations or curations when you're creating your own chain to sort of serve a particular purpose. But it will still need certain Legos of like it would still need like basic DeFi stuff to happen on that side. So from our perspective, there has to be some level of like if I go on the discussion in the sense of like how like decentralized it would be and all that, I totally agree. I don't think infra-wise it's not ready. We might see like a lot more hacks also happen, but at some level of trade-off between centralizations and UX, I think you have to have at least these Legos be enabled, and that's only when like these different app chains or app-focused chains could sort of work. So like from our perspective, it's just let's solve this part of the puzzle. However, like centralized it would be. Like prior to this, I was to look at like a lot of like venture investments deal for a firm. So at that time, we used to often ask this question, like, do people really care about decentralization or not? Like if you go super decentralized, you shouldn't be bullish on like the modular cross-chain thesis, because interoperability, if you are going with a complete decentralized approach, it won't work. Like even if you look at Arbitrum right now, like we are still discussing on how like data availability would happen. Without data availability, you cannot have a concept of like fraud proofs or ZK proofs and all, because you cannot verify that the data was available for you to post all these proofs and sort of like maintain consensus. So Arbitrum has been running for such a long time. All these OP stack chains don't have a real solution for data availability. All these are still centralized. They have billions of dollars in assets. So do people really care about that much decentralization?
Yeah, no, if I can push back on the decentralization and the modular thesis a bit, you know, like I think there is a world where you can be decentralized, but I think as you were saying before, it is a trade-off on the UX. You know, right now you're seeing a lot of the UX, but you know, like a lot of people who currently like USDC on, you know, a given chain, and that's not decentralized at all, but that's okay. There's still a world that likes decentralization, and there's still this role for decentralization in it. And when you're talking about kind of the modular chain and what this sort of looks like, you know, maybe we haven't necessarily found the exact product market fit for it. You know, as a couple panels ago, we were talking about like, will, you know, regulated securities ever trade on a public blockchain? And like he said, probably not. And you know, like we all probably up here agree, probably not. Like it just wouldn't make sense to be trading on Ethereum, but you know, like whenever you actually have like, okay, maybe a chain can actually, maybe a security could be its own chain, and then it could have provenance over it, and that could be something that could be interoperable, and more native digital things that are created. And when you actually create it natively in digital, then cross-chain makes sense, because then you actually, you know, kind of like the Cosmos chains, you know, back to that, like you're sort of like a company and you still have like that sovereignty, if you will, because like you're right, like everything sort of being in this monolithic world, there is no sovereignty. You're basically just, if you want any sovereignty, you have to throw a multi-sig over top like Arbitrum or Optimism did, and that's not necessarily.
Is that decentralized also?
Right, but it's not, you know. So like we need to sort of push beyond that, and I think that's where we're trying to find the trade-off is like, okay, so like what pieces of sovereignty and community control over these things do we want to have? Yeah, I think we're all figuring that question out.
And is that some of the stuff that we have to think about? Like, what else do we have to think about to enable this vision?
Yeah, I mean, what's the vision, I guess, is the question. That's the hard part. You know, like, are we building some sort of just, you know, is the goal a high-frequency trading engine that, you know, like, this is what Solana's thing, like, we want to build the world's fastest NASDAQ on a blockchain. Like, if that's the goal, like, it's going to look different as far as what level of decentralization we want to have. But you know, like if the goal is actually having, okay, well, we want people to be able to have privacy on chain, and we want people to be able to violate OFAC sanctions or something like that, it's going to look very, very different.
All right, moving on to next set of questions. How might improved interoperability and liquidity affect broader financial markets and traditional banking systems?
I'm happy to take this one. And I think Circle's perspective might be unique from others. And I don't think it's like who's right approach. There's all different angles for use cases here. But if you think of real world assets, for an example, right, as it exists today as a borrower, there's so many levels of fees. There's broker fees, there's agent fees, there's other fees buried somewhere in terms and conditions that might not be super apparent. And bringing this on chain is really exciting, right? And you can see the whole stack in levels of the stack, and certain things are masked away, like KYC and other aspects that are not meant to be public. But that's really exciting, and I think that, like, for banks, that's probably nerve-wracking to see, because it's a newer way for instant capital access, whether you're a borrower or a lender. And I think in terms of where this leads forward, we still have a long way to go in terms of everything from the on-ramps, where how do I acquire the digital token, whether it's USDC or another fiat-backed stablecoin, and is it just USDC? Is it other stablecoins? And then how do folks get access to this? Is it accredited investors only? And we'll need to see what shakes out from a regulatory perspective in each one of these regions, and how protocols can abide by these. But I think this changes the whole perspective as it is today, right? Like, again, the example of not having to go to a bank, having to go through a credit facility and having to pay all these fees. We're slowly starting to see this come to life, and I think it will be a while until we have end-to-end use cases in true permissionless ways for folks to do this. But that's one of the use cases. There's many, many others, but that's one we're really excited about.
I think from our perspective, I don't think this thing would be driven too much by the tech. I think tech stack has enough in general to sort of be the rails for a lot of this traditional finance instrument. I think it would be super regulatory driven. But I think a lot of the use cases that might evolve to actually be on the blockchain would be those for which the regulatory is friendly enough to support anonymity. Like a lot of these, in terms of the real world asset space, things that have worked is basically things that have been given access to retail. How right it is, how wrong it is, I don't know. Like a lot of these real world assets sort of pitch it in a way that this real world asset sort of represents that, but does not represent the ownership of that. So that's like legal loophole on that side. But if it's basically supporting anonymity, so from that perspective, yeah, we have a pretty good rails from that perspective, and those are the things that I think will evolve to mature on the blockchain ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, going back to the original question of what's interoperability, I think RWAs kind of bring a magnifying lens to interoperability has to exist on so many different layers. At the base, there's interoperability between different chains, but as financial institutions are coming on chain and building, you have applications building their own sort of permissioning bubbles, so to speak, where they will onboard users, give them a particular badge saying this person's eligible to hold this asset in this geography in this amount. Now we have these new silos of these bubbles of I can hold this particular security-backed token, but not that one. And so even within a single blockchain, these two bubbles can't communicate, and I can't trade my, tokenized Singaporean bond, with this other person's security-backed asset because there isn't interoperability between those permission bubbles. So it's going to be a big problem to solve, and I think new technologies, like on-chain identity, like on-chain credentials of various sorts will help kind of move that forward in addition to the bridges that already are playing such a big role in interoperability.
Yeah, I mean, I can be kind of the bear on it. I think like there's still like, whether we want to admit it or not, there's still probably a semi-decent chance that just DeFi in the US gets banned. Like they could just sort of say that Circle needs a banking license and we all have to do KYC AML if we want to trade on this stuff. And what sort of that world look like? And I don't think it is the end of the world for us. We can go back to banking the unbanked. You can go back to being your own bank, and that's. I think the way that crypto sort of wins in the long run is just by affecting kind of the original plan was like, listen, if we're a fallback, like if you inflate the dollar and people don't like the US dollar, we have other options, and we can all go to these other options that we've built out. And I think that's going to be sort of a valid fallback for a lot of countries around the globe.
All right, kind of closing this out, looking to the future, what where do you see potential for growth for interoperability for the liquidity pools?
Yeah, I think for liquidity pools in particular, going back to different types of silos, we see silos across chains, and we also see silos within individual protocols. I mean, there's still billions of dollars locked in old versions of Uniswap, and so now the single protocol is competing against itself in terms of market depth and liquidity, which continues to be a problem. So liquidity aggregation can start to solve that, but it's not until we get to cross-chain, multi-chain liquidity aggregation that we'll truly see improvement there and market depth and some of the slippage issues. The other thing that we're seeing when it comes to liquidity pools and on-chain trading more broadly is, arguably you don't need dozens of DEXs. There are dozens of DEXs on each chain, and as someone was mentioning before, when a new chain starts, that chain now needs a DEX, which doesn't necessarily make sense. I mean, if you look at traditional financial markets, there's 2 major exchanges in the US, there's maybe 10 major exchanges globally, and so why do we have over 60 DEXs in the crypto space? So I think true multi-chain interoperability will allow for specialization, and if you are, let's say, a gamer on Polygon and you need to access a different token in order to make a purchase, you can use cross-chain routers and technology to execute your swap in order to purchase your asset, and that'll be routed to another chain, execute there for the best possible price, least amount of slippage, and then those funds and your destination token will basically land back in your wallet without the user ever knowing that their trade executed on a different blockchain. So that's the type of kind of user experience improvements that we need to see in the trading realm, and some of the infrastructure and interoperability players will truly unlock.
Yeah, I think in the future, if we are going to have that many chains with activity, so far people are just not actually using interoperability. They're just forking the same concepts on new chains, giving an airdrop. It's working. But going forward, how we see things is that right now the applications have been designed to work on a monolithic chain. So all this liquidity, all these assets are linked to the app logic. How we are seeing things is that going forward, these two things have to be discretized. Your app logic and assets have to sit separately, because that's only when you can have this real interoperability app. There has to be certain shared state. There are a lot of issues with that in terms of it's a pretty difficult problem to sort of fix the interoperability side of the puzzle, how you sort of communicate between that chains. But there are a lot of different solutions with having certain trade-off of centralization and UX that are building. There is I know Omni Network, this protocol is trying to build a generalized standard for having this cross-chain app. There is a lot of people are approaching it through the perspective of ZK proofs and all. But again, that has its latency limitations and all that at this point, at least. And then a lot of people are sort of trying to do it from the perspective of having some sophisticated actor take the interoperability risk. I was seeing recently the stats. If you go to 1inch and you try to do a swap for say ETH USDC, over the past 1.5 years, the probability that that trade might go through a private market maker has been increasing significantly. You would think it would go to a Uniswap or Balancer or Curve, but the probability that it goes through a private market makers, at least if you cross a certain size, it increases significantly. 60 to 70% of the volume might be settled either by a private market maker or by a solver who's doing it on multiple venues at the same time. So I think, they can basically bear a bit of that interoperability risk. On the cross-chain side also, things might evolve in that way. But it's a difficult part of puzzle. We'll see how this thing evolves.
Yeah, I'm happy to layer on. I would say as an industry, we've made incredible strides. I think back to my OG bridging days of using Wormhole and praying to goodness it gets to the other side, and and you'd see all these exploits and hacks left and right. And I think as an industry, we've come so far, and it's something we're really excited about and pushing the boundaries for with our cross-chain transfer protocol. I also think we as an industry need to build more coalitions, have interoperability standards, think more about this, invest more in things like account abstraction. And Circle is taking the longer view of, we think bringing Web 2 companies on chain will help proliferate this and help teach us, what are the things that these huge companies with massive millions and millions and millions of monthly active users, what kind of standards do they need to get comfortable with coming on chain? And we'll learn and we'll grow together as an industry. So we're really excited about that. I think the UI, the UX, I know everyone talks about this, but we'll get there. We'll get there. And one day we can all onboard our aunts and uncles and grandparents into crypto and say, hey, you don't even know it. You're using, cryptography or a blockchain. And I was talking to my Uber driver about this, and they're like, why would I bet? Why would I speculate? And I was thinking that would be the day when I order my Uber and it's with USDC on a blockchain, but I don't even know what blockchain it's on, because users should have their own preference, and there will be very vertical specific use cases for chains, and we're going to keep seeing more chains launch, but just having safe, secure, interoperable standards and ways for users to flow back and forth, I think it's going to be really interesting, and excited to see what we can all do together.
Speaking of standards, is this something we need? Standards body, maybe?
I mean, we ran like an Oracle standards group for a while, and we did a bridging standards group for a while, and standards are super, super hard in the space, just because everyone already is doing something, and you'd never want to upgrade a smart contract. So like no one ever wants to talk standards. They're generally helpful, and it's usually just good to get everybody in a room talking about it. And I think we're going to continue to do it, but it's
One day, Nick.
yeah, no, standards are hard. Even in the real world, standards are super, super hard.
We can sit in a room for 12 hours and. Yeah. All right. I think that right about does it. We're right on time. All right. So Nick, Jasmine, Sid, Janice, thank you very much. Big round of applause for the panel.